When one begins the journey of looking inside themselves for what's real and what's meaningful, it takes all of this attention, energy, and awareness that you're focusing outside of yourself, that you're trying to grasp onto, and you turn that inside, everything changes. You start to get a sense of what it is inside of yourself that really gives you a sense of connection to all of your innate intelligence and innate abilities, and they just start to connect together in a way that's very authentic and unique to who you are. And it starts to build this magnetic, glow about you.
Welcome, dear ones. It's such a joy to bring you another episode of All That We Are. You may have noticed that we've updated our podcast artwork and brought in the beautiful new logo that was created for us by Laurie Menner of Cosmic Collage when we changed our name. Write to us and tell us what you feel about it. We love hearing from you, and would also love to hear how you feel about recent episodes of this series. We had another powerful members soul space this month, and I am really loving how this is a way that as a community, we can activate what we explore in the podcast, creating deep ripples of change and possibility in the world. If you have benefited from anything shared in this podcast and want to be part of our circle of reciprocity, please join our membership. It's offered at a sliding scale, so you join at the level that you can. And you receive everything that is on offer, including getting to connect deeper with this community of beautiful souls and getting to explore our library of past workshops, as well as being part of the future events that we're creating with the Going Deeper sessions. My guest today is Richard Andrew Salony. Arthur Schopenhauer once said, "Talent hits a target no one else can hit. Genius hits a target no one else can see." Richard Andrew Salony's entrepreneurial and philanthropic career irrefutably affirms Schopenhauer's statement. To say his biography reads like the monk who sold his Ferrari, only in reverse, is an understatement. From a monastic community where he lived as a young man for 7 years before transitioning to a global tech entrepreneur, his ability to not only anticipate ground-shaking paradigm shifts, but also to develop tangible commercial strategies that result in mass market adaptation is demonstrably irrefutable. Today, in conjunction to his launching, financing, and advising companies, movements, products, and services that in his view replace antiquated systems that will not lead us to a sustainable future, he holds events and serves as a guest speaker and participant in think tanks, conferences, gatherings, Jeffersonian dinners focused on establishing a new narrative for a sustainable future. In this episode, called Our Gifts of Magnetism, we explore the themes of conscious technology, psychedelics, and prosperity as we speak to the question, how do we awaken and connect to the power of our authenticity to build prosperous and regenerative lives? We hope that this conversation inspires you to connect deeper to the beauty of who you are and what gifts you have to offer to our future. Welcome to All That We Are, with me, your host, Amisha Gadiali. On this show, we explore the weave between activism, the sacred, creativity, and regeneration, the spaces where our inner and outer worlds dance. From healing trauma to nature connection, to new technologies to ancient wisdom, it's time for us to move beyond silos and into an integrated way of being. Every one of us has ideas and personal experiences to share that can lead us to a more beautiful future. Despite the challenges we face as a global community, or the pressures we meet in our daily lives, when we stop and dare to listen, to ask ourselves the big questions, and to share what we are already doing and envisioning, we create the futures of our wildest dreams. And we begin to embody all that we are becoming, and all that is possible. I am delighted to welcome you to All That We Are and to be here in this incredible home that you've created in Bali. I would love for you to share with us, what are the futures of your wildest dreams? Whatever that means for you, collective, personal, and beyond.
I like to think about it as creating a new narrative for humanity, as is the foundational things that drive our society today, and what are those things that need to be changed in order to create a different future than the current trajectory is bringing us towards. And the three key components of that new narrative are, first, authenticity. Second is empathy. And the third is a deeper connection with nature. So going back to authenticity, the world we live in today, compromise has almost become endemic, wherein each individual is conforming to forces outside of themselves that are telling them what is acceptable. And I believe that that is causing great dysfunction, both on a personal and collective level. We are experiencing a sense of anxiety and depression at unprecedented rates. And I believe that is because people have a basic disconnection to themselves and who they are, and have no sense of peace and comfort and feeling at home, in their own skin, because they are so oriented again towards the reflections that they're getting back from somebody else and living to that, complying with that, and then feeling a deep sense of disconnection, to who we are. As a result of that, we have a society driven by products and services that have no authenticity. Authenticity is not a filter that we actually use in what we adhere to as a belief system, or what we bring into our life as products and services. Often they're gimmicks or things that hold up this outer sense of what is acceptable and what one should have. And so we then acquire and desire things that sustain that which is not, authentic to ourselves. And I think as we individually and collectively start to find a deeper sense of authenticity within ourselves, we'll use that as a measure in terms of how we determine who we're going to have relationships with, and the products that we acquire, and the companies that we do business with, and the people that we choose to represent us. In politics will all be based on how authentic is this person? What is their deep connection to what it is that they are communicating or selling or propagating? The next one is empathy. I believe it is a quality inherent in human nature that has been suppressed, greatly suppressed. And we have become deadened. We become deadened to the experience of each other. And we become so focused on only what makes ourselves comfortable and maybe a small circle, around us. And we are simply not concerned with anything that exists, outside of that. And when you think about what is going to make it possible for 8 billion people to survive, on this planet, if we're not caring, for each other, then you're going to have extreme cases of polarization between those that have and those that do not. And if we really follow the trend, that polarization is growing, exponentially. And so what is it that is going to awaken that sense of compassion, in feeling it, and empathy, for others, I believe is an essential component of the new narrative. And the third is a connection to nature, where we see ourselves as a part of nature and not something separate that we are trying to conquer or protect ourselves from. When we look at the evolution of the Homo sapien, there was that initial phase in which there is a fear of the environment, and we need to rise ourselves up to protect ourselves from some of those fears. But what often happens is when we reach a level of safety and protection, rather than letting that go and moving on, it just continues to go to extremes and extremes and extremes. And if you examine, from my perspective, what has been the pulse, of evolution and growth for the Homo sapien, it's been this great desire for ever increasing levels of convenience. Convenience without consequence. And that is what is destroying that very evolutionary drive that has risen, that has caused us to rise to where we are, is ultimately what will be, our demise if we don't come to grips with it. And we're not going to be able to come to grips with it unless we feel a connection to nature, and unless we see it as a part of ourselves and not something separate from ourselves. Now, what excites me immensely is the reemergence of psychedelics, in our society. Because if there's two things that psychedelics do, one is they awaken empathy. You feel this deep love and connection and care, for other people. And you get a sense of how nourishing it actually is to yourself to actually care and feel for another. The second is it puts you deeply in touch with nature. When a plant talks to you, you never look at nature again, in the same way. And since a vast change needs to happen, and happen quickly, in order to avert the current direction that we are taking as humanity, we need something that is going to quickly awaken, humanity. Not a slow evolution like the adoption of meditation practices that have a deep cumulative effect. And, as a yogi and as a former monk, I'm deeply, supportive of those things. But I like the opportunity of what psychedelics can do to quickly, awaken a society. And we're quickly moving, in a direction where psychedelics is going to be an alternative answer to a broken multi-trillion-dollar, mental health industry that is going to address anxiety and depression, this disconnection back to the first thing of one's authenticity. It will awaken the opportunity for one to connect to themselves again and find what's genuine and meaningful. It will awaken empathy, what will create that sense that we're all in this together, that there is no winning without everybody winning. And it will awaken that deep, deep connection to nature, which realizes that the only thing that we can value in a new society is that which is at minimum sustainable and ultimately regenerative. And so we'll start to view everything through those eyes. How is this product or service of what I'm doing, how is that moving us towards, at minimum, a sustainable future and maximum a regenerative future? And we start to value everything based on that. And the greatest value in the world starts to become that which is most sustainable or most regenerative. That is why I believe those three things are key components of a new narrative, and also the role that psychedelics will play associated with the change in embodied lifestyles that are now available once you awaken. Now there are so many programs, whether it's yoga or psychoanalysis or hypnotherapy. There are an amazing number of diverse modalities that once somebody steps into an awakened state from a plant medicine, can then start to adopt practices to embody what they're experiencing on the medicine, lest we fall into medicine becoming just some addictive thing where we keep continually running to the medicine to get that state of being that we're feeling, but we're not taking then what we're experiencing and then finding a way to make it a part of our embodied life.
I have experienced and witnessed huge, powerful shifts on psychedelics. But the other thing that I have experienced and witnessed is that in the psychedelic communities, it's not true that everyone is authentic and connected to their empathy. There is a kind of shadow in the conscious communities where that ability to connect to people outside of that community or outside of that a very small community within it still exists. I've also witnessed people get quite lost. Not everyone, but I feel like it's an important thing to mention because it is really prevalent in this psychedelic world.
Very much so.
And I wonder what's alive for you around that and how we can bring psychedelics into society in a way that is grounded and that does lead to more authenticity and empathy and the connection with nature. I feel like that definitely happens for everyone.
Yes.
But the other two, especially when we're talking about something that is more global, so it's not even just being more empathetic to another person within that circle or even the wider circle, but actually people that have completely different lives and backgrounds and that are in completely different states of reality.
Yes. Let's take the trajectory of psychedelics and the path that it's taking. For example, you are going to see it very prevalent in Western medical facilities, and it's going to be administered in ways that are still very much a part of a Western medicine mentality. And when you examine the Western medicine mentality, there's not a high emphasis placed on what they call bedside manners, where this deep, deep connection with the individual is very, isolated and clinical. Now, even in those environments, the medicines themselves will do their magic, but it's going to be a very, very different experience having a medicine journey in a doctor's office under neon lights than it would be, in nature, than it would be, let's say, in an environment like this with a highly trained, shamanic guide.
In a sacred space.
In a sacred space. So a big focus for me is creating what I call the trainings for the new shamans. Those of us today, the early pioneers, we've had the opportunity to go to Peru and meet these amazing, amazing shamans that have experiences that are not going to be available, to the masses. So the majority of people are going to be having this experience, in their hometown and something that's accessible to them. And so I believe it is really very, very important that a very significant focus happens on training, the new shamans. So I was working with a group of people to create a guild, an international guild, very similar to a kind of an old European, guild, psychedelic practitioners, where there was a deep, deep commitment to an ethos and a training that needed to occur. And there's many, many different modalities, as we know, but we were going to kind of identify the top schools of approach to psychedelics and turn those people into teachers and trainers creating facilitation programs. Our group identified 500,000 people around the world that fit into categories of yoga teachers, personal trainers, marriage and family counselors, death and dying counselors, all of these people who by nature already have developed these empathetic skills. It's a part of what they do. They also already have communities of people that they're working with. So this would be an opportunity for them to take this training on as an addition, to what they do, serve their communities in a meaningful way, and also be very connected to each individual that they're then taking through, and then helping them to determine an embodiment path that could follow their awakening. For example, so they might have somebody sitting with them, and in the journey they discover what this person really needs is a marriage and family counselor, given what they're going through. With this other person, what they need is maybe they're dealing with, bulimia or something like that. They need this. So this idea of how do we build, this community, of embodied health and wellness professionals that are now going to integrate themselves, into this movement and offer at least as an alternative to those that want a more authentic experience. And so it would be like today, going to a grocery store, and I'll use America as an example because I'm most familiar with it, and I played a big part in these types of businesses being in place. And that is, you're going to go to a grocery store and you can go to a typical supermarket, or you could go to a Whole Foods, and you're going to have a very different experience of what you get. So this would be like creating, the Whole Foods of that industry. Roundabout, getting back to what you're saying, is in any experience, you can never control what the result is going to be, for all people, because it is so relative to that person's, individual journey, of where they are in life. But what we do know is that it doesn't take a majority of people to make something become a majority. I was originally a pioneer in the natural food movement in America in the 70s. I built some of the first supermarkets and bakeries and juice factories. More important, I helped farmers convert to growing, organically, and then help create the system that would validate that they were actually growing that way, understanding the ecosystem that needed to be built for something that was going to grow. And we built that into, one of the largest and thriving, natural food businesses in America. Later on in my career, I moved into technology, and I built one of the first mobile telephone networks in America. From reading a white paper from Bell Labs before these phones even existed, and I read this white paper and I went, wow, this is going to change everything. It's going to change the way we communicate. It's going to change the way we educate. It's going to change the way we entertain. And I could, because I'm a visionary, I can see the ripple effects, of something. But in each case, they were an organic movement of passionate people that were the early adopters. And then all of a sudden it reaches a point where it has a certain level of adoption, and then it becomes a hockey stick, in its growth curve. And then my next one was, again, in psychedelics. I helped take some of the current companies that are public psychedelic, and they're doing the research. I've been very involved in that. But in each case, what I experienced, for example, when I saw something in the beginning, at first when I would speak about what I saw, people looked at me like I was crazy and on something. Then they became afraid of me because they were afraid of what I was doing, how it was going to threaten what they currently did. And then all of a sudden it reaches to this point where it's just accepted by everybody of course, this is what is. And I believe that psychedelics will be the same way.
And so as you see it, we're going to move into a time where everyone will have experiences with psychedelics, much like everyone has experiences with paracetamol or has had experiences with paracetamol, and it will become outside of this kind of quest and more part of how we live.
At least that is what it is that I'm projecting, and the whole economics, around it today that make it only available for a certain few will change, just as everything does with more acceptance. The cost goes down when people start to see the benefits as an alternative to what they're currently doing. When we look at the amount of money that we are spending in dealing with anxiety and depression, I think that we'll begin to see ways in which it can become more and more acceptable and available.
And how will we be able to do this in ways that also protect the indigenous communities that have been keeping these plants safe for all these years?
Protect them in what sense?
I know there's some fear that as different plant medicines get trademarked or owned, patented, that there might be impacts on indigenous communities and that they also may not be rewarded for the incredible work that they have done and are doing in protecting and deepening our connection with these plants.
Well, I think what we're actually going to see is probably actually less and less of actual plant medicine. You're going to see chemical compounds of them. There's good and bad in that. The good is there simply isn't, enough demand. You're going to start, for example, the toad medicine. You're going to start killing every toad, that there is in order to abstract these medicines. They're just not going to be, available. So the chemical compounds will be, alternative that make it more, accessible to people. The way in which the indigenous cultures will be recognized is, let's go back to more of the movement that I'm talking about that is going to build this. It's the idea of how do we take the best of Western sensibilities and the best of shamanic, history and blend those things together. And part of that will be, an honoring of those traditions, and you'll see flows back to these indigenous communities. For example, one of the gentlemen that I've been working with, his name is Wade Davis, and he was actually the one that brought Timothy Leary and Richard Albert. He was a fellow Harvard graduate, and he brought them down into Mexico and into South America to have those experiences. And he has a foundation now that is one of the largest funders of indigenous cultures. And you're going to see a lot of these groups, I believe, become a part of what their give back is going to be, is to help sustain, the wisdom and offer some protection to some of these indigenous cultures.
You shared at the beginning, as a former monk, that psychedelics, they can give us an experience that is more immediate than developing a meditation practice. Do you believe at this time that there's something that has shifted in consciousness where it's easier to access those states? Or do you feel like maybe actually it's harder to access those states with all of our distractions and the ways in which our brains are changing?
I'd say both. So as somebody who's been practicing, traditional, meditation techniques for now 50 years, and when I see what's available for technology, in sound waves that affect certain states and waves, I'm actually amazed at how quickly you can get, into those states, and how quickly you can overcome some of the distractions, and how much more difficult it is to use the older techniques because our minds are so incredibly active, and to get yourself to a state, of stillness and quiet with all of the information that's going on in your mind. I believe that we're using, technology to address really where we are, in the evolution of humanity. So that's a part of the evolution, is we're continuing to find more relevant ways of becoming conscious.
As our whole evolution is taking place, we have to keep adapting, and we have such incredible tools now through technology, with sound, with light, with understanding of frequencies that allow us to drop into different states, with homeopathic impressions of different states or elements or medicines. When I saw you talk, you were sharing your story of going and becoming a monk and then emerging out of that into technology. Can you share a little bit around that journey and actually how you chose to go and be a monk?
Let's start there. So I grew up in the 50s and then was a teenager in the 60s. And it was a time of great transition, especially in America, where the 50s I would call this great age of innocence. And there was a deep, deep belief in the goodness and the wholeness and the rightness of the American dream. And I was, deeply immersed, in it. I had these great dreams of being the first one, in my family to get a college education and to create some, economic, stability. My father worked 2 full-time jobs, blue-collar worker to support, 6 children, basically slept 3 hours a night, in order to give, his family the best that he could. And I really wanted to go to that, to that next level. And I had great aspirations of going to an Ivy League school and becoming an attorney, and ultimately working on Wall Street. An attorney only because the way to create great wealth in America was to understand what the laws were, so you knew how to operate, around them in order to generate the greatest wealth. And that was just all a part of, the smartest person gets to the top. And so I was very deep in that paradigm. And then all of a sudden people like Bob Dylan started to show up on the scene, Joan Baez and the Beatles, talking about their experiments with psychedelics. And then all of a sudden that journey, that kind of interested me in Timothy Leary and Richard Albert. And I started at 16 years old, experimenting with psychedelics. And that journey all of a sudden was bringing me to a very, very different, reality. And I think it highlighted, I went to this event that everybody, remembers as called Woodstock. I was like 16 years old, and there was a Swami named Swami Satchidananda, who was a very famous Swami that was bringing yoga to the West at that time. And he came up on stage and was teaching pranayama to 500,000 people, mostly just zonked on LSD, me being one of them. And I saw this guy step up on stage, and he was the most radiant being I had ever seen. His face just glowed with light. And I just went, wow, this guy knows something really special. And it all came together for me that what this man knows is what I want to know. And where I thought I wanted to go was all of a sudden looking like a fractured fairy tale. And it caused a great disruption, in my life and my family's life, because I was the golden child. I was one of those kids that just everything went well for me. I was the best in athletics and really, really popular, and school came easy to me. I was that golden boy, and everything was going to happen, for me. And now all of a sudden I'm talking about, no, I don't think I want to go that path. And I think I need to go on some kind of spiritual journey to find myself in this, reality. And that's exactly what happened. I decided not to go that path. And I thought, I'm going to go and find a spiritual community, if you will, one in which whatever Swami Satchidananda found that caused that glow, I could learn those things.
Well, I'm sat before you and your glow, and so it appears that you did.
It was a beautiful journey. It was a 7-year journey, for me. At the end of 7 years, I felt like I had accomplished what that journey was all about for me. And I've now felt called to go, back into the world and bring some of these things that I believed were not just applicable, in a monastic community, but were applicable at all levels of life, as as a family man, as a businessman. And so I went out on that journey.
And can we speak a bit about radiance and the power of connecting to our soul's radiance?
Yes. And I will tie that back to one of the foundations I talked about of authenticity. When one begins the journey of looking inside themselves for what's real and what's meaningful, it takes all of this attention, energy, and awareness that you're focusing outside of yourself, that you're trying to grasp onto. Maybe this is me, or maybe this is me, or maybe this will make me happy, or maybe this will make me comfortable, or this will make me more attractive. And you turn that, inside, everything changes. You start to get a sense of what it is inside of yourself that really gives you a sense of peace, that really gives you a sense of at-homeness, that really gives you a sense of connection to all of your innate intelligence and innate abilities. And they just start to connect together in a way that's very authentic and unique to who you are. And it starts to build this magnetic, glow about you. And that magnetic glow about you begins to attract everything it is that you actually need to accomplish what this authentic awakening in you is calling for. And you're no longer grasping outside and waiting for, I'll be successful when this person gives me this amount of money, or this will happen for me when this happens and this happens and this happens. You're back to, you're just building off everything that it is that you have. And that's creating a magnetic force that's starting to all of a sudden bring all those things that you need into your field. And it's very opposite to how most people live and how we live as a society. We're always trying to, what I talk about, move the deck chairs around. Mm-hmm. I'll be happy if I go here, or if I change this job. We're always trying to have something outside of us change what's lacking, inside of us. And when you reverse that process, there's something that just starts happening.
And really it connects you to a space of knowing what's right for you, and also knowing what it is that you need. Because as you were saying, we're so culturally conditioned by an idea of what life should look like, what we should need, quote unquote. And so we find that so many people are chasing things that are really not right for their own soul's path, and therefore missing something, like their life, or where they can contribute the most,
yes,
or what it is that they have to offer. And so it's a huge thing to be able to live from a place where you know that you will connect with that which you need, and those other things that maybe you want are not actually for you.
Yes. I have a program that I use when I advise individuals and companies. And I have this kind of personal persona. I mean, sometimes I think we all have these archetypal images of something that kind of represents a part of ourselves that we are. And so mine is a genie. And so I have this program where I offer somebody that I'm going to grant them 3 wishes. But it's very different than the old genie that, if you're fortunate enough to come into the genie's lamp, you get to rub it and you get to ask 3 wishes, and whatever it is, the genie's going to do. But as we all know, that never really, really works for people. It's like people that win the lottery. What do they say? 80% of them have lost their money, all the money they won in the lottery in 2 years. Because it's oftentimes what we think we want is not really what we want. It somehow has become an idea, of what we want. And so when somebody tells me, their 3 wishes, we then examine, Each wish really deeply say, well, what is it that you want this because of what? What is it that you think or feel that this is going to bring you? And then we start to really examine, those kinds of things and bring them to a place where they're no longer requiring somebody to grant them a wish. It's they're building the ability to understand what their need is and how they're able to satisfy that themselves. And then they're free, because then they're never reliant, on anything. And so that then ties into this whole notion of, which again is another subset of the new narrative, is understanding the difference between wealth and prosperity. If we look at wealth in the classic sense, it's accumulating things that have come as a result of us accomplishing something. And it's some asset base that we can then draw upon that's going to keep us safe or allow us to do what we want to do. But the illusion is, and anybody that's never had money that all of a sudden gets money, all experiences the same thing. They believe that 80% of the things that they worry most about are all tied with money. And they think, well, if I had this money, then I wouldn't worry about how I'm going to cover my rent and how I'm going to feed my family and, all of those, basic things. And all of a sudden they come into money and those things are now gone. But now all of a sudden they're replaced with, oh my God, now I have this money. What do I do with it? I can't just sit on it because that might be irresponsible, but what if I invest it and what if I lose it? Now all of a sudden you become preoccupied with this and what you're supposed to do with it. And it's no less stressful than the level of stress that you had before. It's just, first there is a mountain, then there is a mountain, then there is, you're just moving to this next component. And so what it is that we learn is that it's not what your success produces that will ever make you feel safe. I think it was Jesus that said, don't store your treasures where moths can corrupt, where rust can corrupt, or where thieves can break in, and steal. Because those things will happen. Economies will go up, currencies will go up and down. You'll make good investments, you'll make bad investments. Those things are temporal. They can always go. But what someone can never take from you, which is what I call prosperity, is your connection to the creative process that says at any given moment, you have the ability to tune in to what it is that you need and draw to you what's necessary to make it happen. Once you get to that state, you're never worried about something disappearing because nobody can take that connection away from you. It's yours, and therein lies freedom. Therein lies liberation. You become a liberated, sovereign being because you know that you are connected through the power of your own magnetism to attract whatever it is that you need to take care of what you need. And you then start to look at assets in a very different way. You don't look at them as how much do I accumulate to be safe? You look at what is it that I need to accomplish what my authenticity is calling me to do in service of others. And so your assets are just simply whatever that requires. You don't need anything more, and you'll always be able to attract, what it is to accomplish it. When I left the monastery and had to learn the ways of business, I became a student of the new way of doing business. And so I learned how people did business, and I would observe it. And I learned how you could be successful doing that, but it never really seemed to be the most, authentic way. And it seemed highly, highly inefficient. So, during a certain stage of my career, I was living in New York City, and every morning I would dress up and I'd put on my Armani suit, and my Mercedes limousine would come and pick me up, and I'd spend all day long going to investment banks because I was on a quest. I was raising $5 billion for this telecom tech venture that I was doing. And just
a little telecom venture.
And all day long, that's all we did was just pitch. And I went, there's gotta be a better way, to do this. And my next evolution, and what's now occurred for the last 20 years, the way I raise money is I hold gatherings in places like this, my house here and my house in California, and I just hold the kinds of events that you kind of came to, and I invite, magical people to come that I think it's going to be relevant. And I don't even talk about my ventures and what I'm trying to do. I just simply show up. And in the course of conversation, somebody new will go, well, what is it that you do? I kind of do this and I kind of do that, and leave it at that. And someone will go, well, wow, that seems really interesting. Could you tell me more about that? Tell them a little more about that. Next thing is like, wow, I'm really interested, in that kind of thing. And in fact, I've got a fund that we're interested in those kind of projects. Oh, wonderful. Well, let's get together for tea, tomorrow. And so instead of knocking on the doors, trying to convince somebody that they should want what I have, I just simply be. And I just simply radiate, who I am and attract to me those kinds of people. And it all takes care of itself in the most seamless, organic way. I'm not doing something that's separate from me, where I'm going and living another life that's inauthentic in order to accomplish something that's authentic. No, just make every aspect of what you do an authentic representation of who you are, and watch and see what happens in your life.
For everyone listening that doesn't have a beautiful house and maybe knows lots of magical people and might not already be in that place of spaciousness because they are struggling to pay the rent with cost of living crisis, or somebody like your father that's in it and doesn't have a lot of space, how do they apply something like this in order to change where they are?
So take a walk anywhere. Even if you look out this window, you're going to see beautiful plants, growing in this lush garden. Then look at the wall, and you're going to see these ferns growing out of the wall. Well, some plants find themselves in these lush gardens. Others find themselves in a wall. But the very way of nature is that it finds sustenance wherever it is, and it finds what it needs to sustain itself, and then it moves towards the light. And so just like I started out, I had no money, I had nothing. And having something is not really relative. It's tuning in to the abundance that exists wherever you are, relative to where you are. That there's no place that you need to be other than where you are to have everything that you need to sustain yourself. And if that process of accomplishing something is then evolving you to something more, it will take you there, but it will take you naturally. But you don't get there by saying, I'm here and I need this in order to be successful or happy. No, it's always finding it, exactly, where you are. If you come to one of my events, you will find that there you might meet a billionaire at my event, and you're going to meet yoga teachers, you're going to meet, healers, you're going to meet people that are making, their living, supporting their family by doing, 10 massages, a day. I don't differentiate who I surround myself with by their wealth. I surround myself by their prosperity, by their deep connection and love for what it is they do and how they find richness in being everything that they are and finding a way to share it with other people. I find that nature is a vortexual upcycle, and that typically doing that will move you to new echelons of a higher expression, whatever that means. It doesn't mean that it means more money or more extravagance. It just means that it's deeper, and it's a deeper and more authentic expression
It
of
could
who you
mean,
are.
It could mean more beauty,
Yes.
more grace, more belonging.
Yes. When I built this home 4 years, I lived in a room that was half the size of this, for 4 years with a simple, outdoor kitchen. I was no happier in this environment that I'm in now than there. I loved this environment. I loved that environment. My sense of wellness really has I go back to California and I've got a garage full of the most exotic cars. Here I have a little motor scooter and that's what I drive. I'm as happy on my motor scooter as I am. It's not relative to those things. It's wherever you are, finding the deepest sense of contentment and appreciation in it, and not being attached to having something have to be a certain way to determine whether it is you're going to be content or not.
Thank you for tuning in. If you are enjoying this episode, do join our membership. For a small contribution, you can be part of our community where we deepen the conversation and offer spaces of learning and embodiment. As a member, you are a patron supporting the making of this show, keeping the episodes full length, free and accessible for all. And you receive a number of benefits such as monthly soul space, going deeper sessions, access to our library of workshops, and discounts on all our online and in-person experiences. Our membership is what makes us able to make this show and stay advertising free in a world that is always trying to sell us stuff we don't need. Head to allthatweare.org/membership to find out more and join today. Clearly that's come through the entire journey that you've been on in your life. If you were to distill it for people that are like, okay, how do I begin? Or maybe that are saying, okay, I've been meditating, I've had my plant medicine journeys, and I still can't quite live from that place of prosperity.
Yes. So the Buddha had a training, if you will, that was designed mostly for those that were coming to a monastery for education. If you went to a society like Tibet, it was not uncommon for many of your children to go into a monastery, some of whom would stay in a monastery because that was highly valued, but others was just going there to get a strong spiritual foundation, in their lives to then take to their lives. And a part of that training was something called the 5 powers. Now, if you found it in the original Buddhist text, you might not even recognize it how I'm sharing it. So I'm sharing it from 50 years of experience in using this as a foundational approach, for example, when I work with either individuals or companies. And the 5 powers, the first power is discover what it is that you really love. Take time to just examine what it is that just naturally lights you up. What it is, the time disappears. Even what you're going to get as a result from it disappears because just the joy of doing it just makes you feel wonderful. Find those things and now make those the focus of your attention. If you have another job that's now supporting you or supporting your family, and that job is your vocation, then make these other things your avocation. Do this in your spare time. Give them the time and energy and allow them to grow. Second power is once you discover that, because you talk about the mystical journey, discovering what you love is what turns the physical into the metaphysical. It is what turns the common experience into the mystical experience. What they say, the dance and the dancer becoming one, or the artist and the song becoming one. So once you have that as an orientation, then what it is that you love is the second power is called familiarization. You have to become really good at what it is that you love. So you become a student, you become an apprentice, and you use your spare time and you use your energy if this is important to you. Instead of going out and partying or doing these other things or spending countless hours watching, Netflix films, learn more about what it is that you love. Become really, really good at it, because you'll never be great at something you love unless you become really good at it. And that requires commitment and discipline. But what's really happening in that process is, take an English guitar player like Eric Clapton, who I'm a real fan of. He found his passion for what he loved. He picked up the guitar at 6 years old and he knew this was it. But he couldn't play Layla at 6 years old. He studied, he played the guitar until his fingers bled, learning everything that there was to learn. To get to that point where the mechanics that take the predominant amount of your attention to do become secondary, become so natural that you're no longer thinking about the mechanics. They do itself, and you're now in this inspirational state where this inspired state is coming through you and your mechanics are just doing it naturally. That's when you become really special at what you do. Okay, so if you find what it is that you love and then you become really good at it, then the third power is called the manifestation stage, or the farming stage. It's, you know what it is you love and you're really good at it, but how are you going to use that in a way to offer service to other people in a way that those people will value enough in order to give you what you need to continue doing what you love? That is where many people drop and fall, because they don't learn this attunement to relevancy. They just have this idea, this is what I love and this is what I'm going to do. And if people don't like it, well, then there's something wrong with them. Or then they get real upset. Well, maybe I'm not good enough because people don't like it, because they haven't taken the time to really understand what is relevant in this field and this gift that I have that people will really find value in. It requires deep listening. It requires deep sensitivity, to your environment, and an attunement of testing to see. You master that phase and you will be successful. Anything you do, you will reach success. That will happen for you. That is the basis of becoming successful, in the material world. The movement into the spiritual world happens at the fourth power, which is ego transcendence. Because what happens is, once you master the third power and you're really good at something, you start to get a lot of attention from other people. So adulation starts coming in. It's a tremendous amount of energy with adulation. Someone gives you attention. That's energy. That's energy coming in. And the interesting thing about the ego is the ego has an endless appetite to absorb adulation. It's like, bring it on. And we see mass examples, of that. Now, it doesn't interfere. You've already mastered the first three. So your ego doesn't mean that you're still not going to be incredibly successful at what you do. It's just you're going to build this massive, massive ego. It's very, very difficult to sustain. You take someone like, a rock star, someone plays the Super Bowl and has 1.5 billion people, around the globe sending them, I love you, I love you. It's a lot of energy. And then what do you do with all that? A lot of people fall apart at the seams. They just can't contain it. And so the fourth power is this transformation into this idea that, wait a second. This really is not about me. I am a vehicle. I have been gifted with this gift that's coming through me, and I am simply the servant, of this gift. It changes the whole dynamic of it. So it's now no longer all this energy feeding you. It's you passing that adulation on in humility to say, thank you for making me a vehicle for this. And it's opening up your field to even greater and greater service. That's when you become a game changer. That's when you really have the ability to channel phenomenal amounts of energy for the good of others and for the liberation, of your own soul, because you're no longer identified with it. You're just the humble servant. And the deeper you become in awe of what's been given to you to give to others, the greater the capacity to channel it becomes.
Absolutely. I was at a dinner last night for a sister's birthday. I invited everyone to share what they adore about her. The last person to share comes from a background of Islam. And she said that, when we create these fields of all of these compliments and we're sharing, everything that we love about this person, that it also opens up the field for insecurity, that perhaps somebody might be feeling, oh, how come I'm not as radiant as she is? Or how come I don't glow as much as she does? Or how come I'm not doing these kinds of beautiful things? And then, of course, that it also can inflate the ego of the person who's receiving. A lot of people have more undeflated egos. And so for most people, it's good medicine at a certain level. Yes. to charge up the cells and to bring that connection of their soul's beauty back alive. What the sister shared is that in Islam, there's a prayer, which we ended up all chanting together, that actually it offers the compliments back up to the divine, to the source, recognizing that that's where they are going anyway, that all of the beauty that this woman is, like, she hasn't created it, it's been created. And so there's that offering, and also there's a prayer of protection around it as well, because recognizing that these are divine gifts.
Yes.
And divine gifts, they need protection, because when we shine, sometimes that also can invite in energy that is disruptive or harmful, and as well as what can happen when that energy interacts.
Yes. And it always will, because anything that is, its opposite will appear, in equal measure. That's just the law of duality.
Absolutely. I find that the deeper I go on my path, the crazier things that happen.
Yeah.
And you almost feel like you're explaining a movie when you're like, oh yeah, and then I had this really beautiful experience, and then this happened, and it's like, because you're just playing in these different fields.
Yes. Yes.
And it's all about being able to come to a place of humor with all of it. So the fifth power.
Yeah, so the fifth power is the law of circulation. And that's the reminder that you always have to keep your gifts, your blessings in circulation. That this notion of, I need to hold it because maybe I won't have enough, or maybe it's not good enough yet, that every time you receive some sort of blessing, have some sort of aha that comes into you, and you're able to digest it for what that blessing is, it needs to find a way in order to be shared and given. And that the nature of the giving moves in a circle, affecting individuals who are affecting individuals who are affecting, and by the time it comes back to you, it's built up so much momentum. It's like what the Hindus call a Shakti pod that just kind of wakes you up, and then it enables you to go to the next higher, realm of your service, and then it goes out again. So it's just a reminder of always keeping things, in circulation, always keeping it moving.
I really feel that even with this podcast, that now the culture's shifting around putting paywalls up in podcasts. So halfway through the episodes, it will be like, and now to listen, you have to be a subscriber. And I really believe that the reason that this medium is so powerful is that you and I could just be having tea together, and then I would be receiving the blessings of this conversation, but we're able to share this with so many people around the world, and they're able to tune in, and then those that wish to, that have the means to support deeper by joining the membership and all of that they can, but it's not to get this, that this is the gift.
Yes.
And that we have to share our stories and share our wisdom and share our experiences and create these spaces where something beyond what we have already experienced ourselves becomes possible.
Yes. I wanted to go back to something you said, because I think it's really important that, this notion of how does everything that we're talking about here become relevant to somebody right now who's in a state of feeling very, disconnected, and everything's just not working,
the anxiety,
well for them.
the
all
stress,
all of
the
those
depression.
things. And then they're looking at somebody else and saying, well, that person's, so radiant, and look at me. And again, this notion that says each person has the ability at any given moment, anything that you need is in your field to bring you in connection to your natural radiance. It's always, right there. And whenever I sit with somebody, and the conversation usually begins with all the things that are missing, in there. I don't have this, and I don't have this, and I feel disconnected here. And the conversation goes on and on, and almost every year. And then we immediately just talk about, tell me what it is that you love. What is it that you really love? What brings you, what brings you joy? And we bring everything back to those little things, those little moments. Build on that. Just build on that. Bring your attention to that. Do more of that. Find a way of doing that thing that brings you joy. What's the experience of sharing that with another, in another individual? How do you bring joy to another individual? You just bring them down to the most simplest exercises of something that is in their field right now that they're capable of doing. There's nothing to do with, again, if I had this and if I had that. It's always in your field. Everything you need is always, is always right there. And that's the very thing that we need to combat, to change the process of this notion to reach outside of ourselves and identify all the things that we don't have, as opposed to going inside and just finding something that just goes, and that's where we build the process from.
I love that. Thank you for sharing. It's really beautiful. I can really feel it, that often our tendency, especially now, as we have so much information and we see so many different types of people, and then of course all the TV and the media and these different ideas that we have of what's possible, we often look so far away, and then actually that stops us from looking in that closer space around us. And we're all impacted by these impressions of media. Sometimes, it makes me laugh when I think back to things, or I'm watching my nieces and how they're interacting with media, and how they're so aware of California. They live in Devon in England. And I'm just remembering films that I used to watch as a teenager, how then somehow that life that's being lived in that film, especially the ones that you watched on repeat, becomes in your consciousness, almost as if it's your life. So then you want to live in the valley in LA and have all those clothes or whatever it is, which is completely irrelevant for a girl of Indian descent living in the English countryside.
Yeah, yes.
And I'm talking now years ago. And of course, this has all advanced so much. And so much. And it's so powerful, and it's so in our faces. I'm holding my phone, imaginary phone in my hand, because we're always watching, we're always seeing these different impressions. And of course, it's an incredible moment because we're also able to access so much knowledge and wisdom. I feel the big question of this time is, how do we live in a way where the technology really supports us, where we're able to have a relationship with what is available to us that allows us to be more present and creative, and to still honor this closer field around us of what's right in front of us, as well as be these global technological beings that we're also becoming.
So technology will never do that for us. The only thing that will do that for us is consciousness. The technology is there to do it for us, but the consciousness needs to guide. If your consciousness was there, you'd be amazed at the technology that would be there to support that level of consciousness. It's the consciousness that then tunes into the technology that simply makes the consciousness more available, to them. So it's like the moment that you awaken, all of a sudden the things that you become interested in become different. And then you start to see different things and do different things. And that's why it's really, really important that we understand that I'm a big believer in technology and the power of technology and the importance technology will play in our future. But I don't believe that technology will save us until consciousness drives technology. As long as technology is driving consciousness, it will only bring us to destruction faster, because all that technology is doing is just speeding up our ability to do where we're currently, the consciousness that we're operating on. And so that's why everything to me, when I look at the advancement, it always boils down to the awakening of consciousness. The awakening of consciousness is the most important thing that will happen, because the awakening of consciousness will change everything. That's what will drive behavior. That's what will drive desires. That's what will drive choices, is the awakened consciousness. There's one other thing that I really wanted to touch upon, because I find that people can misinterpret this or really get lost in this. And this idea of loving what you do and having these hierarchies in your mind of, oh, well, this person's a great musician, or this person's a dancer, or this person's this incredible healer. And that there's a hierarchy that exists of, well, this is a spiritual job, and being an accountant is not a spiritual job, and this elimination of this notion that loving what you do is not as relevant to what you do, meaning one thing over another. It's loving what it is that you do. So if you're somebody working at a cash register or somebody bagging groceries, the difference is, do you love this opportunity of serving people and catching eyes, with people and saying something, and, can you fall in love with what you're doing? Not because what you're doing itself is more important or less than anything else, but the act of love has found its way, to be embodied. I think it was a speech that
Nelson Mandela about our fear.
Yes, our fear. And then sweeping the streets, as if sweeping the streets with love, as if you're sweeping the streets of heaven. That's really the magic. It's falling in love with what you do. It's taking away this idea, like, for example, I'm home and I've got to wash the dishes and I've got to do the laundry and I've got to clean that room. And those are chores that I have to do, and I got to get those done so I can then go and do something that makes me happy. What if you could get into a state of mind where doing the dishes was a blissful thing? Doing the laundry that's the kind of thing that we're talking about loving what you do, that level, of connectivity.
And I feel like that then makes every day and all of the responsibilities that we have to show up to, no matter how hard that they can be sometimes, that we're able to show up with that presence and be where we are, not be wishing that we're somewhere else or that there's something better, which is also such a thing of this times, an illness of this time, that there's so many choices, and that everyone wants to be everywhere, or everyone maybe wants to be somewhere else in case that's better than where they are right now.
Yes.
And that actually life brings different seasons, and some of them are really challenging and require you to do things that are difficult. And sometimes the life brings a lot of celebration. and getting to find the beauty in it no matter what. And I wanted to ask you about aging, because I've done the maths of of how old you might be from what you shared, and you're so healthy and radiant. And we're living at a time where there's such an increase in degenerative diseases, and I'm curious what you have found to be generative for you, and how we can all live in a way that allows us to connect so much to our radiance and the power of our bodies.
I could answer that on so many different levels. There is the physical level of remaining vital by exercising the body properly and nourishing the body properly, getting proper sleep, and then it starts getting subtler. And that is when you live a healthy lifestyle, and your actions start to become towards what makes you feel healthier and what makes you feel more vital. Like even the way we look at food. I actually desire and only want to eat something that I know is actually nourishing my body. I have no interest in eating something that, of course, every once in a while I will allow myself an indulgence, but the idea of eating something that my body would actually desire, something that wasn't good for me, getting that kind of, harmonic, connection where you start to have an attunement, where your body is actually telling you what it needs for nutrients. It's telling you you've been eating a certain thing, and then it's telling you you need to eat this, or it's telling you need more sleep, or it's telling you need more activity, where you're in touch, your conscious connection to what your body needs to stay vital. So that's on that level. Then there's that whole notion of being relevant. When you're continue to be relevant, when people find what it is that you have of relative value, it keeps you, connected. One of the great tragedies I think we've experienced in a few generations is you used to see a much deeper connection between generations and how they lived together and the values that, that each had to each other. And then we've grown to this point where, old people are basically discardable and not of value, and we really kind of almost repel, our responsibility to them. And in part, it has to do with, a selfishness, this self-centeredness, but also in part, it has to do with older people are supposed to continue to be relevant because they're offering wisdom that the grandchildren want to hear, that the advice that their children want to hear, there's relevant value. Most people in my generation, they've lived a lifestyle that has robbed them of relevance to the younger generation. They just don't see, anything there. So they become more of a burden or a responsibility rather than a contributing factor. So it's how do you continue, to remain relevant? I mean, my grandchildren to me are one of the greatest reflection points, to me, is because they're so genuine. They're not going to make believe they're interested in you if they're not. Can I be relevant, to a 7-year-old child? Am I tuned in enough to what's relevant to them? And can I create in my own experience, in my own presence, something that's alive enough to create a deep connection on? That keeps you young, keeps you very young.
It's amazing how many people don't do that at any age.
So they actually start becoming old at a very young age. I mean, 18-year-olds that stopped growing. I mean, we all have experienced it. You go back home to where you grew up, you meet some of your friends that have never left home, and it's like you've gone back in time. Nothing has changed for them. They've reached a point where they decided that they've learned everything that they wanted to learn, that they knew everything that they needed to learn, and they stopped, at that point. And so nothing in the universe stays the same in the sense, because you're either moving forward and evolving, or it's decaying. And so staying the same in that sense actually becomes a decaying process where you start to become less and less vital and relevant, and your relevancy shrinks to only, a small group that's doing the same thing that you are, holding on to a few little subjects that they can talk about for relevancy. And you might do it to be kind and to try to feel a sense of connection, but you're almost feeling like, oh my God, I can't live, in this limited world of what's relevant to these people.
And so keeping our curiosity alive and our desire to learn and to connect.
Yes.
And do you feel that psychedelics will be able to offer something powerful in this space of reclaiming wisdom?
In the elder community, I think the most important thing that is going to do, death and dying is so broken, so incredibly broken in our society. The disconnection that happens, the children with their parents, and not even to know how to connect in an intimate way, and everybody is suffering because there's not a deep, authentic connection. The opportunities that psychedelics can do to ease the fear and open the curiosity of that next stage, I think is just, that is, amazing in and of itself. But even still, all psychedelics do is they show us what's possible. They take us to a place and say, wow, this is really, but the danger is that you then believe that you're there. And it's really more almost like a mental construct. You have this mental idea of what you think you are and what you think you know, but it's only a mental image. It hasn't really been deeply experiential in an embodied standpoint. And so again, it goes back to our earlier conversation, the embodiment practice of, wow, this is what I see as possible. What do I now need to do, to actually bring that into my life so it's a part of my daily experience and not just something I experience on the weekend when I do my mushroom journey.
Absolutely. What are you most excited about that's coming in technology?
Well, let's put it this way. As a Buddhist, I have learned to love what is for the 10 million reasons that have made it so. So while you hear a lot of people really, really concerned with AI and the implications of AI, and I understand why. So one of the ventures of mine that I'm really involved in is an adventure around AI. It's an academy and it's an incubator. AI is going to replace a third of the jobs that we have today very, very quickly. And that's scary. It's really scary, the implications of it, the economic implications, and just as important, the implications of somebody, even if we were able to come up with this universal income that's going to take care of somebody, what about the sense of who I am and how I contribute and what I do? So where's the opportunity in AI? AI is going to transform our society from doers into creators. Many of the things that we do is going to be able to be done better by AI. But the creative process is still our opportunity for a human being to become creative about something. And then the tools that AI brings almost allows anybody with the tools that AI has today to take a creative idea and turn it into an enterprise or a service in a way that was never even imaginable before. So somebody in Ethiopia with access to a computer and AI can create something that's of great value that they didn't have to have. All they have to do is have access to this. So I believe we're going to turn into an incredibly creative society where we're going to raise children, which is a big part of the next education, that their connection to their creative inputs are going to be the most important relevance for how they're going to contribute to a new future. So with that said, I'm really, really excited about the possibilities and what AI can bring.
Amazing. Well, thank you so much, Richard, for being our genie today and sharing all of this wisdom with us. What is your call to action that you want to leave our friends listening with? There's been so much that we've shared during this time, and it could be an inner one, something that they can do with themselves, and also it can be something that they can support.
The call to action would be to continually ask this question: how authentic can I possibly become? How do I continue to discover new depths of authenticity?
Thank you. And how would you like people to connect with you?
Either Facebook or WhatsApp, both work for me.
Wonderful. Well, thank you so much.
You're welcome. It was a pleasure.
Thank you for listening. We hope that you have enjoyed this episode and it has sparked some inspiration and creativity in you. As always, you can find links to everything we mention in this episode, download our book, and discover so much more over on allthatweare.org. We give space to our guests to share their perspective without debating it or fact-checking, as this approach allows for deep, unedited conversations from the heart. We trust your discernment and wisdom to take what is useful and challenge what isn't in your own understanding. We offer spaces for discussion and integration in our membership community, which we would love for you to join. We don't believe in selling you things you don't need through this podcast, and so it's made possible by you, our beautiful community. If you loved this and would like to connect more deeply with us, please join our membership. You choose what you contribute based on our sliding scale, and you become a patron whose support makes this podcast happen, as well as receiving access to a library of many resources and invitations to nourishing events. Please also hit subscribe and leave us a review wherever you listen so others can find us. This podcast is made by an all-female global team. Me, Amisha Gadiali, producer and host, Anna Greta Folderbach, who crafts the words that accompany each episode, and Mary Chan, who edits the sound so skillfully. All That We Are celebrates all that we are already and the untapped potential that lives inside us. It invites the full power of the more than human world, nature, the unseen, our ancestors, and our future generations. It reminds us that we never exist in silo, through borders, timelines, or polarity, that in each and every moment, all that we are is here.